Fried podcast, Sunday Morning in the Word. And we're blessed to have this morning Miss Ragina from the Dialogue Box. We've been talking on and off for a couple, 3 weeks, and she's been nice enough to come on. And bless her heart, she's fighting through what we all battle is technical issues, but it sounds great. And we are excited to have you this morning for me, afternoon for you across the great sea. And thanks for being here. And I hope you're blessed today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you for having me on. And yeah, it's been a few weeks. I think we've been speaking, and we kind of like had this little connection about spiritual openness and journey. So thank you so much for inviting me on to talk about it. It's a great honor.
Yeah, no, it's an honor for me. And as someone who has, yeah, like all people, kind of a spiritual journey, high seas, low seas, ups and downs, ins and outs, as you say. Some people think when they see you, they think, oh, that person's life must have been just easy. And life is not easy, it's tough. And so their topic this morning is really finding your faith. And Miss Regina has, I just want her to help share whatever she feels comfortable sharing with. And we'll bounce things back and forth on this journey of faith. And the scriptures say that without faith it's impossible to please God. It actually says that more than once. And it's easy to preach on, it's easy to say and challenge people to have faith, but we have I think of phrases. One of them is a crisis of faith, where people meet major issues in their life. It could be a medical issue, it could be a emotional, mental, spiritual, whatever it is, and they have a crisis of faith and begin to question their faith. And again, what do you think about that, Miss Regina? What, from your perspective? And I'm not looking for. We don't. It don't even have to be a biblical answer. Just
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do you feel about that as in your life? That
I,
phrase.
I would say straight. I would say straight off the bat that I'm not going to grift here. So I'm going to be very, very honest with you about where I stand in what I believe and my faith as such. So
Sure.
can I just throw a question straight back at you off the bat and ask you, what is it? What do you? What does faith mean to you in the first place? For me to be able to understand what it is that's being asked.
Yeah, no problem. My faith is found in, because I believe faith is, a lot of people may have faith in something. My faith is found in Jesus Christ, and so that is my anchor. That is what I hold on to. But other people may have faith that they place in their strength, or they may have faith in family or faith in their career or whatever, and that's
Yeah.
what kind of centers them. For me,
Yeah.
it is my relationship with Jesus Christ that
Okay.
centers me, that it keeps me straight down the line, as we say, on the straight and narrow,
Yeah,
and not
yeah.
drifting off into trouble.
Mm.
So if
The
that helps.
reason the reason I ask is only because I don't want to get on this line where a lot of people, when they speak of faith, they're actually speaking of religion and a particular practice or a particular
Yeah,
path of a practice. So if I was to start out straight away, I would say, so there's no misunderstanding. I do not consider myself a Christian because I don't know what one is.
yeah,
I was christened Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I'm not a Protestant. I'm not a Mormon. I'm not a Jehovah Witness. I'm definitely not a Muslim, and I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Hindu, and I'm not a Sikh. Although I do seek, I seek God, but that's the
sure.
only thing I do seek. In terms of religion and Christianity itself, if I understand my relativity of what it is, I don't have a problem with God. I have a problem with the concept of religion and you needing that to have a relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah,
the reason being is so many religions have so many different belief systems that are so vast, completely, utterly vast and separate from each other. You would have to honestly say to yourself, well, right, if I believe I'm right, what I'm actually saying is then that God has chosen me and my kind above every other kind on the planet. And you might say, well, okay, well, the reason that's happened is because they're following a religious scripture. or they're following a faith system which is from a book or a set of words that somebody has taught them, which is all well and good. But when you start defending that so deeply that you become the offense itself, then you're not really speaking for the faith that you claim to be practicing. So there's my thing with faith and religion. So faith itself for me is a personal relationship with God.
Amen.
Now, I lost that completely after a pretty horrific childhood. Um, the usual story for many people, most horrific story for other. I'll share some with you, but I'll keep it as brief as possible because it's not for sympathy, it's for context,
Sure.
context of why I was so lost. So I grew up in a very violent family, like many in Ireland. It wasn't just me. A lot of sexual abuse and violence in my childhood, and then eventually the murder of my mother by my father at the hands
Mm.
of my father when I was 16, just before my 16th birthday. And I happened to find her. Now, it was always expected because of the childhood we had. And I wouldn't say that that was the most horrific moment in my life. I would say that was the pinnacle of the trauma at that point. By the age of 15, I'd already been so broken. Well, not even broken, I would say shattered, but not broken, because meaning that there was many elements to me that were still holding together, but they were definitely fractures. There was fractures going on inside of me from very early, before the actual event itself. And then there was the relationship, which was a forced worship by the Catholic Church of a God.
Yes.
Now, I had a great relationship with God as a child. I remember being 5 or 6 years old, and I have this clear vision of myself in this yellow jumper with these two blue lines through it. And I must have been very small, or the daisies in Ireland were very, very tall, but I was bouncing through this field and I was brushing them with my hands. And I was having a full blown conversation with God, because I remembered the magic even then. And I knew that there was no separation. We're taught to forget that there is no separation. We're taught that forgetting. First, we're reminded of the magic, and then we're told to stop believing in the magic after you've been told to believe in the magic, and then the problem's you. So I remember having a really strong relationship with God. And then when I started to get a little bit older, I say a little bit older, I'm only talking about 8 or 9 here, but I was a very forthright young woman. They called me Doubting Thomas, because it was constantly, why? I need
Yeah.
proof, show me. Everything, I had to have proof for everything. It wasn't so much that I didn't believe in anything at all. It was just that I had questions, and the Catholic Church didn't allow that. It didn't allow me to get any foundation in my faith by having the questions answered that would have made that foundation solid. So the thing that they wanted from me, they kept from me by not allowing me to investigate further what it was that God was. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Amen.
I wanted to discuss with them. I remember getting into a lot of trouble for it when it was told to me that the Old Testament was so magnificent that it was able to predict what was going to happen to Jesus in the New Testament. Now, as a child, you say a child and gullible, but oh, for the grace of God. I actually turned around and I said to them, so why is it not possible that the person who wrote the Testament got the words from the Old Testament and just described it? Now, I'm not saying that that isn't what happened. That I'm not saying that that's what's happened. I'm just saying that there was logical things I wasn't allowed to address. So
Yeah.
it created this distance between me and the church, and eventually between me and God. Now, not because I fell out with God. The distance from having something to believe in spiritually created a gap. And that gap was an opening for vulnerability and other people to step in with other belief systems and other things that could fill that space
Sure.
that did allow for that question, that did allow for it. And then also made me very vulnerable and open to less than healthy belief systems, is the only way I could particularly put it. And healthy being relative, because what one culture finds healthy is not what another culture does. Do you know what I mean? Female
Mhm.
circumcision is normal in one religious practice, but completely abhorrent in others.
Right.
So we have to keep relativity in mind when we talk about these things. So it created a big distance from me, and I ended up going through several religions, completely lost. Everything from Jehovah Witness to investigating Islam, learning to pray in Arabic, and going through many faiths, like there was Jehovah Witness, a short period of Mormon. There was just so many things. I was completely lost and looking for. I was almost a piece of clay looking to be molded, but I was in the wrong hands. I wasn't in the hands of the maker. And the way I see it is really actually quite funny, because I have this image of I say God because I don't use the term Jesus, not that I don't think Jesus was necessarily a living person. If the Father and I are one, well, then there is no separation. So I would just use the term God for me for now. And I always imagine it as, here's God sitting on the chair beside me, right? And I'm going everywhere. Where's God? Where's God? I can't see God. And I'm explaining to this person who's sitting beside me, I'm so lost, I can't find what it is I'm looking for. And he says, go on and go off then and go find what you're looking for. And then I imagine me going off everywhere to find what I'm looking for. And someone coming up to him and said, well, why have you let her do that? Because, like, you know that you're the answer. And he goes, because, well, if I'm the answer, she's going to end up back at me anyway, isn't she? So these are choices, free will. Do you know,
Yes.
what do you want me to force her to sit beside me or let her find out? And this as well is what a thing, this is where I have an issue. And I shouldn't use the term issue, where the issues rise for me in terms of cognitive dissidence within the church. People talk about us having the power and the free will and being already complete and whole with everything that God gave us, yeah? And in one breath, they'll turn around and say, I create my reality, meaning I get up every day, I go out there, I earn the money, blah, blah, blah. And you do. There's no arguing that you create your reality. But if you create your reality and you already have been given everything you need, then why do you ask God to intervene when you've already said that your God is an impersonal God because you were already preloaded with everything you need? Now,
Right.
I'm not saying that that is not the form of a prayer and requesting help, but then you would have to say that the God you're talking about chooses who and he doesn't intervene with. You know, so, okay, well, today I'll give you a bly and I'll sort out your situation, but I'm going to leave that undeserving bugger over there. When we talk about grace, well, surely under grace, we're all already there. So why would be one deserving? These are the issues that no one seems to be able to answer for me. This is why I always go back to God sitting in the chair beside me and me and him. It's me and him. I've been everywhere. I've walked everywhere, and he's sitting there filing his nails, going, "Oh, where she is! Look, she's almost home." You know, and it's like that. That's kind of the
Amen.
way I see it. And
Yeah.
I have a healthy relationship with God, where I can laugh when I talk to God in my head. I
Sure.
have full blown, not in public, but I mean, my conversations with God are beyond prayer. I have spent the last 7 years after a spiritual awakening in complete isolation, and I developed a relationship, what the world would call crazy, which I call the coolest relationship you could ever have. Do I hear voices? Not in the voices sense, no. When I talk about hearing the voice of God, it's about understanding the language of the body, understanding instinct, understanding flow and when to move, and understanding what God sounds like in all of our forms. Do you know, like you'll get that, you'll go to eat something you know is not great for you, and you're like, you'll hear this nagging, oh, I really shouldn't eat that. That's the voice of God. Because if our wholeness is perfection, well, then you're going to be constantly reminded of that perfection through the imperfections that
That's
you
right.
choose.
Yeah.
And that's where my faith is. My faith is in everything that God already gave me. And here it all is. I don't need to ask and scream out, because that means that my faith isn't real. What am I screaming answers for? Was I not made whole with all the answers already? It's learning to understand the language and learning to trust what you know that you really do know, because God didn't make any mistakes.
That's right. That is right.
And that's kind of what faith is to me. And I don't have a
Absolutely.
problem with religion.
Yeah. So when you were going about this search, uh, was how much of it was just a twofold question? How much of it was due to hurt that you were dealing with, and also doubt, hurt from things that happened, and maybe if there was doubt because you were obviously going through different things, and well, this is not it, and this is not it. How much of that did that guide you from place to place?
Initially, I was going to show God he was wrong.
Okay.
I was going to show that pig after he let everything happen in my life. Excuse the expression, but that was what I was going through.
Yeah.
There'd been so much aggression and violence in my life. I was like, oh, are you serious? So what do you think I did to deserve this as a child? You know, and there was
Sure.
like horrific anger. And it was all like, I'll show you. I'll show you. I'll go and learn another religion. See how you like that. You know what I mean? And he's still sitting there filing his nails, waiting for me to go.
Yeah.
This is the whole thing. It's like, when you walk all these different paths, you don't know at the time the full context of what's going on, in because we don't have peripheral vision and we don't have the bigger picture. And that's not to say that my path was planned. I don't mean that. The only thing that exists that I believe in a form of a plan is home, and that's all. We all end up home.
Yeah.
No matter how many you might deny that you've been returned home, that's a different thing. That's choice. That's free will and choice. But we're always brought back home. We're always brought back home. The rest is down to us. So
Did,
yes, initially it was through
yeah.
anger, and then there is a part of me that is deeply, deeply curious and wanted all of those questions I was never allowed to ask as a child answered, because I was effectively still a child. I'd been through so much trauma that my childhood hadn't been allowed to exist in the normal sense, in the relative sense. And I was a very hungry child. I was very, very hungry. I was like, I needed to know what the world was about. I wanted, because I believed in magic, in the magic that God gave me, which is the ability to create through the creator. And I was led to believe that that was what we all had, and then denied the ability to use it when I was told I had the ability to do so, because that now was what was told was Christian had now become esoteric. And I'm like, well, how can these be the same thing? You can't be telling me that I am magic, but then if I use the magic, it's evil. Then, because, well, if God created everything, nothing is evil except the intention and the purpose we use it for.
Right.
I mean, a feather can kill a man if you shove it down his throat and he can't breathe.
True.
Seriously, this is what I never understand with these things.
So you mentioned, which is a powerful word, and you mentioned home. And did that idea of home change for you through the course of your life? I mean, we have a home as a child, but if there's all these problems in the home, that it's home, but it doesn't. It's not home. Home is a powerful concept to go
Yeah.
home. I remember. I'll just
Mm.
say by definition, I'm raising a granddaughter, and she has a lot. She had a lot of range of emotions as a small child, not even realizing why. And I think it was because she'd been shuttled without even realizing it from place to place, never in one place a long time. And then one day, uh, I don't even remember how long she'd been with us. And one day she looked at me and she said, "I'm ready to go home." We were away from home visiting people. And she said, she calls me Pawpaw. And she says, "Pawpaw, I'm ready to go home. Can we go home?" And I don't know what it was at that moment, that just an immense feeling of that she understood that. And it really blessed me that she knew there was a home for her, a place of belonging, a place of safety,
Mm.
security, whatever. If you could just maybe mention a little bit about that in this idea of home,
Yeah.
because I think that's powerful.
I think you actually just made me realize what it is I mean by that while you were speaking. I was listening to you, and I think after what happened, home, the lexicon changed. Home was swapped and taken out of my language, and it became house.
Okay.
So I would return to the house. Now, everybody has a house. So the home part of it was I was looking for a home in respect of looking for a place to belong. But what I realized after coming full circle is the home that we are looking to reside in is this. And if we can't live inside ourselves, which is the true home, where peace has to be, then we cannot live at all. So this is why it's so important to recognize the language of the body and recognize what peace feels like inside of it. Then you will understand when you're home. And then when you're home and you're inside that peace, then you'll realize that that home and peace and God are one. So
Man.
I swapped from having a home to having a house until I found my way back home. And now I have a home, which is not this house.
Yeah. Amen. And that's important. And that is wonderful. How long did it take you to find that from those early days till today? How long ago would you
Okay,
say?
so I went from a damaged child to a hedonistic lifestyle because of the damage and the trauma. All the while, gripping deeply onto God. And I had this Bible that was like 25, 30 years old, and I never let go of it. It was marked up and written in and all the rest of it. And I ended up, that came with me through a lot of my life until I'd gotten to almost the pinnacle of a hedonistic lifestyle for me. When I say hedonistic, I talk relativity, because I'm not talking about being out there prostituting myself or
Yeah.
anything like that. I'm just referring in terms of what I'd previously known as an existence. So that kind of came into my life. And then I met a gentleman. I say a gentleman, I use that term really loosely, but everyone's a blessing because everyone's a lesson. So
Yeah.
I met a man in 2004 after I had had a very a hit record in drum and bass, one of my first tunes after being a reggae vocalist for many years. And I met this guy through it who had similar. It was the times of MySpace. I don't know if you remember
Oh yeah.
MySpace, but it was he had a record at the same time, which was almost competing for the number one spot with Kylie Minogue, a tune called Pack of Wolves. And I met him, and then began the unhealthiest relationship of my life ever. I'm not a victim of him. I chose to stay, but I chose to stay because of the choices I'd been taught I had through the bringing up and the programming that was in my life at the time. What I thought was good for me wasn't. So everything, like with Michael Jackson, good became bad and bad became good. It was that kind of thinking, everything was on its head. What I thought was benefiting me was more worldly benefit than it was anything else. So it hedonistic in that respect. So it became very abusive. He gaslight me a lot, even though he would be cheating right in front of me while he was playing on a PlayStation, pretending to be speaking to men, and he'd go out and meet these women. And he did this a lot. It wasn't the first time. And do you know the worst of it was? This was the saddest part of all of that. I knew he was doing it. I was never fooled at any point, but I didn't have enough self-respect. I hadn't been taught self-respect,
Yeah.
and I didn't have enough self-respect, and the world tossed me around like a pancake because I didn't know where I belonged. So I didn't have enough self-respect to say stop, I deserve more, because I didn't
Yeah.
believe I deserved more. And you have to actually believe you deserve more to not fight for what it is, to walk away from what it is. That some things that you're
Amen.
not supposed to fight for. But he was the biggest blessing and lesson I ever had in my life. So it was it was actually 2017. It was April the 28th in 2017. And I was in London, and I was sat in my flat, and we'd been together for almost 14 years at this point, I think. Was it? Yeah, for yeah, no, it was something like, yeah, we're around that time anyway. We'd been
Yeah.
together for almost, I think it was 14. And I remember sitting on the sofa, and all the time I was really depressed. I was really, really depressed in the clinical sense. My life had become so empty because what was fulfilling him was no longer fulfilling me. And I couldn't blame him for that, because I got with him being a match to that energy. It was the same kind of seeking. So I'm not a victim of this person. All the time was choices. It was just not necessarily the right choices, or knowing that what the right choices would be. So
Right.
I'm sat there, and I pick up a mobile phone, and normally my phone would be full of drum and bass, and you wouldn't really see anything else. So I'm looking on YouTube, and I didn't even have a YouTube channel. I had none of these things. So a guy called Stevenson pops up on my feed, and he's an Australian. He calls himself a life coach, but at the time he was very much just a meditation guide, although he has expanded since then. And he did something. It said a chakra balancing meditation. I thought to myself, well, I don't know what that is, let alone have I got any need for one. Now, I don't know why. I got out of my seat, and I went and got some headphones, and I put them on, because this was not in my sphere, let alone understanding. So I did it. I sat there, and I did this meditation. And then when I opened my eyes about 35 minutes later, I was flat on the floor. And I didn't even know what had happened. I'd slid off the sofa. I'd gotten into a deep, deep state of relaxation, and I slid off the sofa. Sorry, one second. And the most amazing thing had happened: instantaneous spiritual awakening. Instantaneous. Everything in the room. I thought I'd been burgled, and someone came in and cleaned everything. Do you know what I mean? And made it look
Yeah.
pristine, because nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Everything had changed. The colors were the same, but there was something very, very alive about it all. Very, like the plants, they were an energy I could feel and sense and see. And it was so out of body almost, but while being in body. Now, this wasn't an instantaneous thing. I had this sudden urge to get on my bike, and I got on my bike. I remember there was no point in speaking to my partner because I forgot to leave this, but he convinced me through that period of a relationship to get rid of my Bible, which I did because I fell into a belief system of his, and that was when I began to get empty, and this was how this meditation came about. So I got on my bike and I started riding through the park, and I remember screaming inside my own head, going, "Oh my God, I'm never giving this up. Whatever this is, I'm never giving it up." And I'd taken drugs. But this wasn't a high, like, this was like, there's nothing could touch this. This was
Right.
like, the hand of God was on me, and it wasn't letting up, and it wasn't letting up. But because spiritual awakenings sound so beautiful, they sound great, don't they? They sound glorious. No, that they're not. They're not, because what people don't understand is about with spiritual awakenings is you have to empty out. So while the initial part of it is so enticing, it's enticing for a reason, to keep you in. It
Yeah.
feels so. If they showed you the horror initially of something, you wouldn't engage with it, would you? You just wouldn't engage. It's like comedy. Most things are introduced through comedy because it's easier to get someone to buy into something if you make them laugh about it.
Sure.
And that's a dark psychology that comedy uses in society. Well, the same thing was happening with me, and it was just this. I don't. I don't even know how to put. Well, the emptying out started, and initially it was just little things that, I mean, if God is great, right? We all have access to that open door if we really want to. If we sit, I'd been sitting in meditation on and off periodically, and I started to sit quite intensely. And over that time, things started to spill out a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And initially, I could handle it all, but I had no spiritual teacher, and I'd been away from the church since a child, and I'd had no real relationship with God. So I was in this on my own. So I was, well, I say on my own. God obviously was with me,
Yeah.
but then it's still us. It's still us, because we have to make the right choices. We have to want to do something. Yeah, and from the heart, you have to want to do it. You can't fool God. You can't grift off of God, and that's just a fact. You can't do it, no matter how much you might think you can. You can't. So the emptying out started, and then I started to lose everything bit by bit because things no longer fit. It was like I'd lost spiritual weight, and my shoes didn't fit me, my coat didn't fit me, my trousers, and that meant my partner, and it meant everything that was in my life. Like, music didn't fit anymore. It just, things didn't, well, my understanding at the time was things didn't fit. I didn't realize they were changing shape. They were just changing form. That's all that was happening, because nothing really leaves. It just changes its identity, and you see it more clearly for what it actually is. So I couldn't really allow the things to leave. Initially, I couldn't surrender to it. I couldn't surrender. It felt like a punishment. It was like, why are you taking my partner off me? Why are you doing that? It all felt like a punishment. There was no understanding of there could possibly be a bigger picture here or anything better for me outside of what there already was. And my argument was, I've been through enough pain. Why do you keep taking? Why do you keep taking? And it was not understanding, because I had no teacher to walk me through this process, because whatever's in there that's made you what you are, it has to be able to leave for you to
Yeah.
be able to function in a new identity. But that's a really horrifically scary thing when you've identified yourself all your life as a
Sure.
result of trauma.
That's
Who
right.
are you outside of that? Who are you at that point? So that was where I got to at that part. And then my real home, my real coming home, as I call it, has only been the last, I'd say, 2.5, maybe 3 years, with real resistance,
Yeah.
because
W-
there are still a lot of, go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, did you feel fear at that time, or was it uh, a combination of fear plus just joy that you felt like you were moving towards something?
Do you mean the awakening itself?
Yes. Yes.
Initially, utter joy. Initially, utter joy. I felt I made some silly mistakes, but then that's the naivety of a child, and we're all children, and that's the naivety. I was screaming from the rooftops, "Oh, me and God are one!" Not literally, but because of my
Yeah.
understanding of the awakening, I felt God inside me, and I saw Him, and I realized that we literally were. I was writing this piece the other day about footprints in the sand, and it's interesting that people always have this concept that nobody knows who wrote it, but it's a beautiful concept of being lifted, isn't it, and carried by God. Well, if that's the case, then we must be wrapped around him, and we must be protecting over his shoulders. And I've always loved that idea. So everything that's been going on it's always been that case of knowing, but being so angry with my childhood and with the church that I allowed it to become an obstacle between me and what that girl in the yellow jumper and blue stripe knew her relationship was with God as a child.
Right.
So it was like,
Yeah.
if I trust you again, what are you going to do? So there was too much pain for me to understand, basically, is what I'm saying. So I couldn't see the blessing initially. I've only been able to really see the bigger picture in the last 2.5, 3 years. I knew it was an awakening, and it's gone on for the last 7 years. There was no doubt in my mind that. But each time I thought I'd been through the worst of it, more came, more came. But they only
Yeah.
became because of the resistance. I either wasn't willing to let them go, or I wasn't willing to look at them or sit with them. And that's why things hurt. It's not because they're painful, it's because of our resistance to that, the fact that they are. That's where the pain resides. And it's a hard thing to learn, and it is something that you have to learn. But now I come full cycle now pretty quickly. Like, I'll do something, and a couple of minutes later, I'm like, whoa, I see the bigger picture. It
Amen.
doesn't take weeks or
Yeah.
a time of, it doesn't take like something to have to happen. I've learned to listen now. It's like people say, oh, well, every time I go out in the rain, I get soaked through to the bone. And I go, do you take an umbrella? And she'll go, no. I said, well, next time take one. And then you'll see her again, and she'll go, I went out the other day, and I still got soaked in the rain. I said, did you remember that umbrella? No. That's probably what it is, isn't it? And it's one of those, like,
Yeah.
I only need to be told once now, have you taken your umbrella? No, is that what I need to do? Right, that's resolved. And it's almost like once you've got that kind of looping awareness, instantly removed. That's where the grace is. It's instantly, it's detracted from the lessons that are in your experience because it doesn't need to be learned anymore.
Amen.
And it's our
How
willingness. Oh, go on, sorry.
No, no, no. I know you run a lot. And how did running, was that always a part of your life, or through this journey did running become a part of this piece of finding home and getting self and
when
closeness to God?
when I had the awakening, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks after the meditation on the sofa, I began to daily meditate, absolutely daily. I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd sit in meditation for an hour, 2 hours, and I wouldn't function because I'd never had a quiet mind in my life. And this was uninterrupted mind. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced at all.
Right.
So within 4 or 5 weeks of that, once the noise had stopped upstairs, I could hear what it was I was as a child and what I loved. And I remembered I used to run as a child. And I was like, I'm into my 40s now. You're talking like late 40s. And I hadn't done anything active. I was quite the opposite. Quite the opposite, quite a lazy bugger, a terrible diet. Lazy, I say, not sitting on my backside lazy in respect of exercise or doing anything like that. But I moved a lot because I've always been slim. I've always been a very hyperactive person, so very moved a lot. But within this whole searching again for where you belong started to happen again, but in a different vein. So I craved fitness. I began to crave fitness because the meditation started to change my idea on health and my idea on diet and things like that. And when I say diet, I'm not talking about weight. I'm talking about what you consume. So I started to swap a lot of things, like coffee got swapped for water and tea got swapped for water. So caffeine started to be removed, and then meat was removed. Not that I think people don't necessarily need to stop eating meat. I'm just talking about my own experience of
Sure.
it. This what you can only call a kriya. I don't know if you're aware of this terminology. Kriya is like a cleansing of the body and the spirit and the soul from the dirt that the world has clogged into, or you have yourself from choices that you've made. And that comes in many layers, doesn't it? It's not always just a physical thing. Obviously, your thought system's affected by that. So you can have negative thinking, you can have negative bad habits in your lifestyle, all that kind of thing. So within about 3 or 4 weeks, I started going. At first, it was in London. One day a week, I started going to a yoga class. And it was just a bit of gentle movement. It wasn't anything like major because I hadn't moved in years. And then I found myself going on a Monday and a Wednesday. And then I was like, I like this. And it incorporated meditation too. And then I was like, people get scared when you mention this because they think you're going into you started adopting the ethos of the practice of Hinduism. Well,
Yeah.
I suppose you do to some degree. in respect of the benefits. Remember, everything has a benefit and everything has its place in your life for that period of time in your life. Because if someone had thrown a Bible back at me at that point, I would be like, whoa, go away. Go away with your religion and your hostilities. And do you know what I mean? So it's the right thing for the right time. So I started to do that. And then I got really into it. And then I started to do rocket yoga. And then I was doing it like 3 and 4 days a week. Then it was 5 days a week. Then I was working out 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week. And it became not an obsession. People would say it's an obsession. It really wasn't. It was just, I'd always been hyperactive, and I'd found an outlet that had stilled the mind and stilled the body, and enabled me to make really good choices for my well-being and my connection with any kind of higher spiritual energy. So that was how that happened. And then I qualified as a yoga teacher, and I became a rocket yoga teacher, a yin teacher, a pranayama teacher, like a breathwork practitioner, as well as various other things. Now, the reason I did all of that, I'm also a qualified hypnotherapist, and the reason I did all that was because the choices prior to the awakening were choices that the world told me I was supposed to make. That this is what makes you a good woman, this is what makes you this is what makes you this. So I made the choices based on what the world told me. When I had the awakening, I realized I hated all of those things and they meant nothing to me. Not one of them had any value in my existence whatsoever. So then I made different choices, which were the choices I made to become an exercise teacher and all the rest of it. So then that happened. And then the deep part of the awakening happened with all the trauma and the rest of it. And then everybody left my experience. And then I moved down here. And I moved down here, I think it was about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. And this was the final emptying out. This was the final emptying out. This space was. And when I came here, there was no access to yoga, the kind of yoga I did. And so all that high intensity had gone again. So I was left with a massive surrender again. Now the exercise from the body was taken away because what that was needed for the sustaining of that had taken place. So it was able to stop the horror of the release being so intense due to release of hormones and things like that, that enabled it to release better in a healthier fashion, not having had a spiritual teacher. And then I came down here, couldn't get yoga, all the rest of it, and ended up, I was really resisting it because I only wanted to do yoga. Nothing else was any good to me, blah, blah, blah. And then I found a gym. And I did a couple of sessions with a personal trainer, and it was more to kind of like find myself in a bit of comfort, to see how I
Yeah.
felt in there. And then I remember watching this. Actually, there's one on my channel called Peter the Mexican Wave. If you listen to that, it explains how I started running and
Okay.
how it all came about in the gym. But I'll just give you a quick synopsis of it. Basically, there was a man in there. It was the very first day I went to the gym, and I remember it was September 19th, a couple of years ago. And I saw this man running on the running machine, and he looked utterly absent. Like, it's almost like his body was moving and he'd released himself from the body, which I suppose I recognized as what had happened to me in the awakening, in the early stages of it, the joy of everything. And I watched him, and I turned around to the personal trainer, and I'd never ran since I was a baby, and I didn't even really know much about it. And I went to him, I'm going to learn to run like that. And within a day or two, I'd started doing it. And I couldn't run. I was like a terrible mess, as you can imagine. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't run.
Yeah.
But I learned to run one tune at a time. And I used this man without his knowledge as a coach. And I would watch when he would change his pace. I would watch how long he would run before he'd increase speed and blah. And I just observed, and I began to swallow it. And then I started to watch documentaries of people running, and I'm a great imitator. I'm able to imitate movement really, really well, be it dance or anything like that. And then I started to run, and I found myself in the most natural flow. And before I knew it, it was 1 3-minute tune, then 2 3-minute tunes, till I was running 5 6 7 miles. And before I knew it, I was just like, I'm not even in my body. And then this is where the beauty happens. Now, I don't tell people, I haven't actually shared this with anybody. I deliberately leave the body when I'm running, and me and God talk. Because I say, you're all right to carry this, innit? You go, yeah, sure. And then we have a conversation. And then I mean, I'm speaking metaphorically, but I'm
Yeah.
speaking literally of leaving the body, as in I'm present in the body, but the weight of the body is gone. That's what I mean by leaving the weight of the body, because effort is what stops us being able to do what we all can do naturally. It's because we think effort instead of no effort is what gets you the results, because it doesn't mean inaction, it doesn't mean not doing anything, it means the effort towards doing it. You do what you can do, and that's all you
Sure.
can do, and then the joy comes at some other point. So running, no, it wasn't natural for me. Exercise came into my life in my late 40s, but now I adore running. I still don't like running on the street, I only like running in the gym.
Yeah.
But I am, as far as the yoga stuff, I don't actually do yoga anymore, except for my own practice at home. I don't teach anymore. I still do my inversions. I love to do my handstands and my headstands and things like that, because they just make me feel strong. And I think it's good for your psyche to feel physically strong. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like how mine all came about.
So where would you say that you are today? Is there, I mean, we're all on a journey, but is that journey for you, do you feel like you're closer to center, if that's the right word to use, of where everything is kind of in the right place, or is there still pieces of you that you say, I've still got to get to this particular place
There's
in my
I
life?
have no destiny. I have no destiny anymore, and that's the
Okay.
whole point. And when things show up in my experience, I have to find compassion and say, after a lifetime of what happened, you have to understand there will be shadows, and there
Yeah.
may always be shadows, but they don't have to shine. They don't have to block the light out. That's the only
Amen.
difference. Do you know what I mean?
That's
They don't have to,
yeah.
and they will always be there.
And,
It'd be stupid of me to try and rid myself of things that spent more time with me than they didn't. And without those things, they have been the most horrible things that ever happened to me, and the greatest blessings I've ever received. And that doesn't mean I laud in being hurt. No,
sure.
it just means that inside of pain, and that doesn't, I'm not, it's advocating for people to go and experience pain. We're given pain in the right proportion for the lesson we need to learn at any given time. This is why your load will always be okay. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think for me, from this point on, I know what I'm supposed to do now. I know what my final door is that I'm supposed to knock on before I go, and that's to
Amen.
finish the book I'm writing. I'm writing a
Okay.
book about the whole, and it's not even necessarily about awakening, believe it or not. While it is about awakening, it's about the idea of mental health and the idea of it being a psychological issue or a spiritual crisis, a breakdown. And that is not to say that mental health issues do not exist, but I think all too often we're given it as the ultimate answer, and we're given a lifetime solution to a temporary problem, i.e.,
Yeah.
lifetimes of medications, lifetimes without, where a community might be able to help you, or getting more support might be able to help you. You might be able to get back on your feet, but society teaches compassion in the guise of helping when it's debilitating. It can be utterly debilitating. And that's not to say let the man on the street starve, but isn't it better, as the Bible says, to teach him how to fish? And
Sure.
then you doesn't need to rely on you to give him one meal a day. He can go and start catching the food for himself.
That's right. So, are you finding? Are you mentoring others? Is there others around you that you find that, like you mentioned, the man, and he didn't know that you were using him as a guide and how to run. But do you think there are others that are watching you? Either you know them or you think they're there, and you're kind of setting the pace for them. In other words,
I have made a habit now of telling people who have enlightened me or inspired me when they haven't known. When I shared this story with Peter, he was blown away, and he let me catch him in the video. You'll see him in the video running
okay,
beside
yeah,
me on the machine. It widens out, and then you see, and I go, "This is Peter." Do you know what I mean? Because I tell people who inspire me, like I'm currently doing these stories of ladies in there who've had strokes and all that, and they're on the running machines because they're so inspirational. I often I ask them, how do they keep faith inside? And I don't even mean religious faith. I mean faith to continue. They may not know it's inside of God, because not everybody likes that term, but the
yeah,
faith to continue. And I find these things very inspiring. So yes, I let people know that they have inspired me, and I know for a fact that I inspire others, because some of the greatest work we do is not direction. It's osmosis. It's the absence of direction. It's practicing what you preach by being. Gandhi was saying, like, be the change you want to see. Well, I am being.
yeah,
There's very few people in the gym that have the energy I have and that act in the way I do. And they say to me, where do you get all your energy from? And I say, because I'm a child. And they don't understand what I mean. And I mean, we're all children in God. And if we realize that, we can have the energy and the youth of a child. And that doesn't mean to say I don't think I'm 60. Absolutely not. I'm not deluded. I'm talking about we can embrace the wholeness of what God has told us we are if we truly believe. But you absolutely have to truly believe. And I don't mean up here. That's only one level of it. When I was talking about earlier, there being many stages to the clearing out, well, there's many stages to believing too. The proof of what your body can do will only come from the belief of putting it through something, eating the right food, and seeing the result. Now, that's one level of belief. Then you might take on a belief system of changing your thoughts. Now you've got your thoughts matching up with your body because you've changed your thoughts and you've seen some practice here. Now you believe in the body and the mind. Now you've said, oh, let me do what it says in the Bible in one area, or let me do what it says spiritually in one area, or let me do what I feel I'm guided by. And all of a sudden you have those three connections. You have the Trinity, the mind, body, and the soul. And already you're working in full belief. It might be separately. You might not have made those dots connect yet,
Right.
but you're believing in wholeness. You just don't understand what wholeness is yet. And that's why it's super important to understand the language of the body. We need to learn to know what it's saying, because otherwise you can't say, oh, my body lets me down. No, you've let yourself down by not learning how
Sure.
to speak. It's talking to you continuously,
It sure is. Yeah.
continuously. You're not
Amen.
a victim of it. You're not a victim of any of this. Look, I saw a poster the other week, and it was a picture of a 70-year-old woman and a 70-year-old man. And the 70-year-old woman was in a chair being spoon fed in a nursing home. And the 70-year-old man had a backpack, and he was up a mountain. And it said, which one do you want to be? And
Oh, yeah.
that's what God is. And that's what God is, the right to choose. It's funny how people bring faith and religion in when it comes to the bad choices they've made. Oh, this is God's plan for me. No, it's not. You can't talk about having a choice and then saying that the plan has been to bugger over your choice and then stick in the plan, because that
Yeah.
doesn't work with what you believe. And this is where I suppose I don't necessarily speak to people too much, because you have to be either open, and I mean completely open, to not defending your belief, to have a conversation in the first place, or at least, if you're going to defend your belief system, make it not be from a place of hate and rejection of another person's belief system. Be it from a place of understanding and logic. And then if you can convince that person, great. And if you can't, then it's not yours to do so. That's their path to walk. You know what I mean? You've done your best. You've done what you set out to do. And the rest is up to them.
You talk about this book you're writing, and I oftentimes speak in terms of my life. And this, I know you're talking about physically writing a book, but our lives are chapters. They're like a book. And I've said
Hmm.
this many times. I the last chapter, and I'll say this about people too. The last chapter of their life has not been written yet. I have a son that is he's had a tough time. He's in trouble. In fact, he's incarcerated right now.
God bless
And
him.
I've said this about his life. I'll say the last chapter of his life is not written yet. This is a chapter in the book, but it's not the last chapter. How do you envision? And I know this is really projecting out. I have two last questions, and this is the one of them. How do you see the last chapter of your journey in this life? How do you see that? If you're if you feel like I'm there, everything, I'm home, is
Yeah.
it just a continuation, and the last chapter is just the whenever that comes, or is there still things that you say I'm going to do, I want to do before that last chapter is finished?
Oh, there's obviously things I'm always going to want to do, but the thing is about the last chapter, right? It's subject to so many variables, and those
Sure,
variables are down to choice. So the
sure,
last chapter, first we've got to remember we're writing it.
yeah,
And what we go through. And people don't like it when you tell them that they are both the protagonist and the antagonist in their own story. They hate it because it makes them understand that they have to take personal responsibility for what's going on in their life. While you may have been a victim of some things, like myself, due to trauma or whatever, one, you have to accept you put yourself in the situation, and two, you have to get compassion and say, right, I put myself in it because I knew no better. Yes, I accept I made the choice. I made the choice because I didn't know any better. Now that I know better, that choice would be different. So with the last chapter, I think don't ever try and get to the end of it and just keep writing the lines and let the lines change when they come off the edge of a page. We
Oh, that's
can't be
good.
always trying to keep it in A4 because it just doesn't work that way. And that is the path to madness, because the hardest thing with people and faith is letting go of control and
Right,
letting go of writing the final word. We don't have the final word. We have choice, but we don't have the final word because we'll be gone by the time we want to write it. So the final word
right.
has already passed. Even in this moment, the final
I
word
like
has
that.
already passed.
I like that. And the last thing I would ask is, looking back at the young girl who was going through the field and the flowers and the dress and this closeness with God. And I know this is one of those deep psychological questions or whatever, but I think in this way myself. I think back to my youth. I think back to, somebody asked me, I was in my interview yesterday, what's your earliest memory? And anyway, looking back, when things were still, for that little girl, everything was centered. She had what she wanted. If you could speak to her, what would you tell her? If that were possible, what would you tell that little girl that would be a help to her as she moved forward, not knowing anything that's going to happen, and you couldn't share it with her? But what would you say to her?
Well, the first thing I would say to you as well, she wasn't a happy little girl. She had a close
Okay,
relationship with God because of sexual abuse.
okay,
She had literally locked, it was a disassociation from the world, that I would go out into the fields to be with God, but it didn't take away from the magic that I knew me and God were one. That
amen.
that didn't take it away from that. What would I tell her? I just told her, what can you tell someone who's going to experience all of that? How do
Yeah,
you give any logic and say to somebody, it's going to be okay? You're going to lose everything a million times over. Your heart's going to be broken. You're going to find dead people. You're going to be used for drug running. You're going to get yourself into all sorts of nonsense. How do you tell a child that? The
yeah,
child would kill itself there and then, wouldn't it? I was already breaking because I was screaming out to adults about what was happening to me, and they wouldn't believe me. So I
yeah,
already was breaking. But I think that I struggle when I use this term, but it's only because words let me down. People say, "Would you change anything that happened to you?" Well, I couldn't. One, I simply
sure.
couldn't. So we're talking hypothesis here, as well. So if I did say, could I or would I? Well, no, because one, I wouldn't know it was going to happen, and two, would I not? Would I be who I am now?
No, not.
What you have to, I think the question would be, would I give up any of who I am now if it meant letting go of what happened to me as a kid? Then no, no. So I would only hold her and say, I'll see you when you're older.
Yeah, amen. And knowing that there is an older, knowing that there is a place that you get to, that you did get to the other side of those things, and here's where you are, and here is a blessing, and we're
Yeah.
blessed for having you here this morning,
Bless
or
you.
afternoon for you, and we're
Mm.
so blessed. Share
Can I
about
just
your
let me
channel
quickly say
too.
before my channel,
Oh, go
just
ahead.
I just want to quickly say one thing, that because I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying. I am where I am, but I'm not complete.
Yeah,
It's just that my relationship with God has become a very beautiful one. It doesn't mean that things don't go wrong in my life, and it doesn't
sure,
mean I don't make bad choices, and it doesn't mean I don't hurt people, but I just try to never do it intentionally. And if I notice I have, I try to correct it.
right,
And pride does get in the way in the same way it does with other people. So
sure,
I'm not trying to be anything other than what my experience was, and now I have a personal relationship. But my channel is basically the dialogue box, and it's about passing conversations, which I tend to have most of the time in the gym, but other times they are just passing conversations with myself. I have this inner dialogue going, and I think therefore I run is because when I'm running, I have some of the deepest thoughts that I have, because I think I let go of the body, and it's easier to have a conversation with yourself, and I come away and I write them. But the whole idea of the channel really is to try and help people look at things through a different lens, to
yeah,
not necessarily, I mean, there are no new words under the sun, no one's telling a new story, everything's the same. It's just
right,
that I'm trying to look at it from a different window. Like all windows are dirty, but all windows can be cleaned as well. You can just take a cloth and you can wipe it and you can see out quite clearly from another direction. So the dialogue box is about offering a new lens that to things that already exist through thoughts
Oh,
and people and
I love that.
experiences.
I love that. You're a blessing, and I appreciate
Oh,
you so
bless you.
much for
So are
being
you.
here, and just your. I love the way your directness and the way you're able to put that into uh, a way that is perfectly understanding to me as a person. Because I talk about relationship. I always tell people I don't have religion. I have relationship. I
I
don't want
love that.
religion. I
I
hate
love that.
religion. I
I
want
love that.
relationship. And if I have a relationship, then I have something. I don't have a somebody else's idea of what that should be. I
Mm.
have a relationship, and that's my blessing, and that's your
I think
blessing.
most people are coming into that language, to be quite honest, because a lot of people have been hurt by not the church can't hurt you, but the idea of the church. And when it lets people down, they're brokenhearted because you expect more of an organization that claims to be a representative of God. And the
Yeah,
biggest lesson I've learned through that, which you probably have too, is people are people first. And
yeah,
then whatever trade they go into, they take that character with them. So if you have a person who was a bad person who becomes a priest, they're always going to be a bad priest. It's got nothing to do with priesthood or the church or anything else. It's just that it makes it easier for the church to grip onto vulnerable people who want to belong or who are in need of a greater connection than themselves. And
yeah.
that's where the danger lies, I think.
Amen. Well, thanks so much. We will let you get out of here.
Thank
We
you.
have a wonderful day, and
Oh, and you.
I hope you'd be would be welcome to come back. I'd love to come back
Can't
and
wait.
continue the discussion.
I
Uh,
love this. I can't wait. I can't wait. It'd be lovely.
Yeah, and folks, go to Rumble and look up the dialogue box and get those blessings. How often do you post? I don't know that. How often do you?
Every Sunday at 6 o'clock, British summertime. So tonight, the one going up tonight is called "The Opportunity to Grow," and it's that will go up at six p.m. this evening. I won't tell anyone it's about, but it's just about. I'll just give a quick, not the thing itself, but it's about how we often overlook opportunities to grow because we don't recognize them as opportunities to grow.
Awesome. I'll make sure that I give that a listen. So
Yep,
thank you for that. Have a blessed day,
and
and we'll let
you,
we'll
and
let people
you.
get out of here, and we'll end the stream. Thanks so much. It's Dave in the AM with the Southern Fried Podcast and the Cornbread Nation on this wonderful Sunday that we get to be alive and share. And what a blessing that is. Everybody take care and have a great day. Miss Regina, bless your heart. We thank you so
Bless
much. Let
you.
me end the stream. All right, get that down.